Hi there, BookTube. It's the 1st of December as I record this, and I thought I'd do a little video about my December reading plans. Now, I'm trying to not have too many very formal kind of TBR-y sort of plans this December. But then I realised that I am going to take part in two lovely seasonal December reading events that I thought it would be nice to sort of celebrate and share and flag to you and thank the hosts. So that's motivated me to make a TBR-ish video. So what are those events? Well, one is Christie's Missing. Now this is, I think, the 4th year of Christie's Missing, and it's an event that's about encouraging us to read books by Agatha Christie and other related kind of crime novels and so on, crime fiction. And in the early December period that kind of corresponds with the time when Agatha Christie mysteriously went missing, disappeared, and that was between the 3rd and the 11th of December back in 1926. And the hosts are my dear friend Berna of Berna's Bookish Adventures, and Naomi of Naomi's Bookshelf, and Rachel Fryman, whose channel is called Rachel Fryman. And I'll link below because they've got some fun prompts and other ideas related to the reading event. But the number one thing that I'm going to take part in is the group read, and that's of course an Agatha Christie book, and it's Murder at the Vicarage, and which was her first book involving Miss Marple. I think, Miss Marple and Hercule Poirot are probably her two sort of best loved detectives. And this is the one where she introduces Miss Marple. And it's like written in 1930, so it's just at the time when she was really getting into the swing of things. She'd been writing detective fiction for about 10 years. It's the golden period of the Queens of Crime, the British crime novel, and I'm very much looking forward to reading it. I have a feeling that I must have read it at some point, but I honestly don't remember. I need to start a list of which Christies I've read or not. She wrote so many, I don't know, 70 or something, and it's easy to muddle them up. But not only is it the group read, it also meets one of the prompts, which is to read a book with murder in the title. Now, I'm taking part at the moment in a sort of a group read with a little group of booktubers, reading the works of the Argentine crime writer Claudia Piñeiro, and brilliantly that works out for another or two more, I think, of the Christie's Missing prompts. But let me explain more. So, Claudia Piñeiro she writes crime fiction, but I suppose if is it literary crime fiction a genre, a reasonable label? They're sort of psychologically interesting, really well written, and because Elaine Knows was such a hit a few years ago, we're getting more and more of them available in translation. And there's a couple of her older ones that I hadn't come across, and a group of us kind of agreed to pretty much work through all her books that are available in English translation. And our December one is Thursday Night Widows. Now, so how does this? That came out in 2005 in Spanish in Argentina, and the translation by Miranda France into English came out in 2010. What prompts does it meet? Well, that's a prompt to read something set outside the UK, but also, and perhaps more significantly, to read an author whose work has been inspired by Agatha Christie. And in fact, Piñeiro has specifically spoken about how Agatha Christie has been an inspiration to her. I mean, I think it's probably hard to be a woman writer of crime fiction and not, pay a debt to Christie. But Piñeiro is a very contemporary. They're psychologically interesting. She uses them to explore, like the hypocrisies of Argentine society, misogyny, things like, marriage and love and motherhood, and but at the same time, they are always, of the ones I've read so far, at least, pacey, gripping, got a page turner quality, but not your average, not cozy crime, put it that way. Not that there's anything wrong with cozy crime. I love that too. So how am I going to fit in the last of the Christie's Missing prompts? Well, I'm on a bit of a Sherlock Holmes binge at the moment. What happened was, back in October, one of our group challenge was to read things by either Sir Arthur Conan Doyle or Wilkie Collins. I thought I'd dip into both, and I embarked on listening to Stephen Fry reading the Sherlock Holmes novels and stories, and now I'm an addict. I don't know how many I've worked through now, but in December I will get to The Return of Sherlock Holmes, which is another of the sort of collections of short stories, which I think possibly are better than the novels. Anyway, and how does that match a Christie's Missing prompt? Well, the other prompt is to read an author that is mentioned in an Agatha Christie novel, and happily Sherlock Holmes is. Now, as well as reading The Return of Sherlock Holmes, I will try to also read a specific short story, which is from the last collection, his last bow, and that's The Disappearance of Lady Frances Carfax, because that is actually parodied by Christie in her novel Partners in Crime, where she sort of enjoys aping the style and referencing her precursors in the writing of crime fiction. And thank you, Berna, for pointing that out to me, which means I get an excuse to read more Sherlock Holmes whilst also taking part in Christie's Missing. So that's one of the events I'm taking part in. What's the other one? The other is Ghosts of Christmas Past. Now, this is an attempt to get us to revive the lovely Victorian tradition of reading or listening to ghost stories around the festive season. And it's started by Vin at Revenant Reads, and then he has co-hosts Mark and Debbie and Mindy and Dave and Elaine. And I'll put the details in the show notes. But the idea is it's a very accessible reading event, this, because, all you have to do is read a ghosty, spooky short story. But I'm hoping to do a little bit more than that. There's a group read of an absolute classic Victorian ghost story, and that's The Old Nurse's Tale by Elizabeth Gaskell. Now, Gaskell is an author whose novels I love, but I haven't read so many of her short stories, so it's nice to be sort of pulled into reading one of those. That's, as I say, a kind of genuinely spooky, kind of ghost story. But humorous ghost stories were also part of the sort of Victorian ghost story tradition. And during Victober, I heard a number of people sort of wax lyrical about having a great time reading Oscar Wilde's humorous ghost story, The Canterville Ghost. Now, I think, a bit like Murder in the Vicarage, I think that I have read this so long ago that I'm not even sure. I think I read it as a sort of older child or teenager, but I don't know, It's terrible, isn't it? I didn't start keeping lists of what I read until, somewhere in the early 2000s, and anything before that, Who knows? So it's the perfect excuse to go back and either read or reread that. Now, those are both actual Victorian ghost stories, but as a reading event, it's not confined to, it was a Victorian tradition, but you can read non-Victorian stories. And I'm going to read one that is bang up to date. And that's a new novella by Susanna Clarke. And it's called The Wood of Midwinter. It's just been published in the last few weeks. It's only, I think, 60 pages long. So, it's a sort of somewhere between a short story and a novella. And Susanna Clarke, you're thinking, who's she? Have I heard of her? What's she written before? Piranesi, she wrote. Brilliant book. Absolutely loved that. Won the Booker Prize, I think. And before that, you might have heard of and may have read her long kind of fantasy magic kind of novel, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, which again I thought was tremendous. It's her books come out with long gaps between because she has, I think it's fibromyalgia, that is really sort of, or chronic fatigue syndrome, one or the other, or both. And that's really sort of interfered with her ability to write, not the ideas, but just the process of writing has become painful and challenging. So we have to treasure anything new that comes out from Susanna Clarke, and I'm going to read that. Then I've got a buddy read happening in December with one of BookTuber's commenters extraordinaire and a highly valued buddy reader by BookTubers in the know, and that's Jo Smith. And I was really delighted when 2-3 months ago, Jo commented on a video that I made suggesting a buddy read together. Now, the video she was commenting on was one I made about authors where I feel like I really ought to, or would like to, what's a bad word, isn't it? Would really like to read all their works, or all their novels at least. And one of those that I said, I absolutely know that I want to do that is Virginia Woolf. I've read a lot of her books, but not all of them. And I mentioned that I've particularly not read her earlier works. And so Jo suggested that we read her first novel together. And that's The Voyage Out, which came out in 1915. Now, again, back in October for Victober, I read Charles Dickens's first novel, Pickwick Papers, and I really enjoyed the experience of reading a first book by a writer that I've come to love and sort of see how their style is emerging, the kind of the way they write, the ideas that interest them. And so I'm really hoping that The Voyage Out will be a similarly rewarding experience, and I'm sure reading it with Jo will add to that very much. Now, I think in that same video I mentioned that one of the writers that I have read all the novels of is George Eliot. And, I feel like, to really say someone is one of your favourite authors, you want to read as far as possible all their novels, don't you? And I think I also said in that video that I really thought it was about time that I reread Middlemarch. Oh, I didn't wave The Voyage Out at you. I will now wave Middlemarch. And I think when you look at those two, you might see why it is that although I often refer to Middlemarch as one of my favourite books by one of my favourite authors, I've never reread it, unlike some of her other books. It's a bit of a chunker, isn't it? Chunkster. It's 800 and something pages. So you need the right moment to reread something like this, don't you? And I think this December might be that right moment. So I'm saying it here, so I'm committed. As it's a reread, I think I might allow myself to have it as an audiobook, because I enjoy audio, particularly for rereads, and Victorian novels often work well on audio. I think because they almost expected people to read their books aloud to each other. So, often they lend themselves to audio. Anyway, so that's in my December plans. Then I've got a couple of other things that I'm committed to because I'm doing them with other people. My in real life book group has chosen a book that I'm really pleased about for our December read, and that's it's a modern classic from the Brazilian author Jorge Amado. I'm never sure the Portuguese Brazilian pronunciation of Jorge. So, it would be George in English. So, but yeah, Jorge Amado came out in 1937. I'm going to read the Penguin Modern Classics translation by Gregory Rabassa. Earlier this year, I read Gabriela, Clove and Cinnamon by Amado, and I was captivated by it. I mean, it's a bit sort of, it's got an element of sort of, I don't know, Latin machismo about it in its sort of attitudes to women, but just such a gorgeous book. Atmospheric, vivid, full of incident, slightly surreal, delightful. So I'm hoping that Captains of the Sands will live up to my high expectations, having enjoyed my first Amado so much. Then Tilly and I have been trying to do, that's Tilly of Tilly's Shelf, a joint read, a shared read each month this year. We've sort of accidentally skipped a month in October, I think, but our December choice is slightly less recent than some of the things we picked because it's from 2020. Everything we picked has been contemporary fiction, so from 2020 onwards, and this one is The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. Now, why have we picked that? One reason why it feels sort of the moment to read this, as we haven't already, is because the sequel came out couple of months ago. So if we enjoy this, maybe we'll want to read the sequel. What was the sequel called? I can't remember, but I'll put it in the show notes if you're interested. But The House in the Cerulean Sea, as I say, is, now how to describe it, I think that it's a heartwarming book, I hope, for as a December read. A little bit lighter than the one we read in November. It's kind of YA-ish, but a book that's enjoyed by adult readers equally. It's fantasy, it's queer, it's sort of a found family story about special children. Yeah, sounds like definitely one that we might both enjoy, and it's one that's come highly recommended by booktubers who I trust, who read more YA and middle grade fiction than I do, people like Gemma of Gemma Books, for example. So fingers crossed for a goodie. Then, on the sort of vaguely seasonal reading theme, and really, really contemporary, right bang up to date fiction, I'm just about to start this one, The Land in Winter by Andrew Miller, which came out like just a few weeks ago, and sounds kind of, wintry, doesn't it? And it is. It's set in the West Country of England in 1962, in what was the big freeze of the period. It was a sort of notorious winter when there were blizzards, and that's the sort of context for this story about two couples. And what I know about Andrew Miller is that his writing is very acute, elegant, thoughtful, but really kind of often strays into the sort of uneasier kind of areas of the human psyche. He's read, I think this is his 10th novel, and I've read 4 or 5 of those at least, including what I think is one of my favourite ever historical novels, works of historical fiction, Pure, which is set in 18th century Paris. So I have high expectations of this book, and Steve already read it, and yeah, he enthusiastically sort of pressed it into my hands. So that's my last sort of definite December reading plan. So not outrageous as a TBR. I'll probably squeeze in some other things. Will try, I think, to sort of round off and finish a couple of my long, slow reads of this year, like The Tale of Genji and the poems of Nazim Hikmet. So, and you know, once I start on Miss Marple, there's a risk that I'll kind of get into a bit of an Agatha Christie binge too, I think. We shall see. And one of the reasons why I've been reading extra Agatha Christie this in the latter months of this year is in memory of Alice, of Alice's Giant Bookshelf, because she was such a Christie fan. So, yeah, if I can, I might squeeze in a few more Christies. Do you have lovely December reading plans? Do you try and... I don't generally think that I do kind of like seasonal reading, but around Christmas is perhaps the exception to that rule. So what about you?